Good morning, y'all. I want to talk to you this morning about something that I have been watching build in the model data over the past several days, and that I think has not gotten nearly enough attention in the mainstream weather coverage, because the story of the Gulf system and the tropical development question has been dominating the conversation, and rightly so. But there is a second story developing this weekend that I believe is going to be the more consequential of the two for the broadest number of Americans over the next 2 weeks. And that story is not about rain, it is about heat. Because the atmospheric pattern that has already driven two historically significant heat events in the United States this summer, events that together have produced record-breaking temperatures from Billings, Montana to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and that have been linked to dozens of deaths and near-record electricity demand on the national grid, that pattern is not breaking down this weekend. It is rebuilding. And the Climate Prediction Center's probabilistic hazards outlook, updated just 2 days ago, is carrying language that tells me everything I need to know about what the next 2 weeks are going to look like for a very large portion of this country. Something very big is developing this weekend, and it is not just in the Gulf. Let me walk you through what the official data shows, what the CPC is showing, the official forecast language that matters, the Climate Prediction Center's probabilistic hazards outlook, the official long-range hazard assessment tool that covers the period from this Sunday through next Thursday and beyond, was updated on Friday, July 17th. And the language in it regarding the heat pattern developing this weekend is as specific and as significant as anything I have seen from that office during this entire summer. Multiple model ensembles are showing anomalous mid-level ridging persisting over the western and central United States through much of week 2. The CPC is specifically noting a closed 594 decameter height contour remaining near the Four Corners region throughout that period. Let me put that number in context for y'all, because geopotential height is one of those atmospheric variables that means a lot to meteorologists and not much to the general public, and it deserves a translation. A 594 decameter contour in the mid-atmosphere during July, the climatological peak of the Northern Hemisphere summer, is an extraordinarily high value. It reflects an upper-level ridge of unusual amplitude and persistence. When the CPC is showing that contours sitting over the Four Corners region, not just for a day or two, but through much of a 2-week forecast period, they are describing a blocked, anchored, stubborn ridge that is not planning to move anytime soon. And then the CPC uses language that I want every community in the central and southern United States to hear clearly. There's increased support for a period of subtropical ridging building into the south-central United States at the end of week 1 and into week 2. And then this. Southerly flow off the Gulf of America is favored to boost dew points east of the Rockies, resulting in potentially hazardous heat index values across parts of the central and southern plains and the Gulf Coast. Potentially hazardous heat index values. This is a phrase the CPC uses when the combination of temperature and humidity that the forecast pattern produces rises to the level of genuine public health risk. They are not flagging uncomfortable heat. They are flagging hazardous heat index values, the range where heat exhaustion is likely and heat stroke is possible for anyone without adequate cooling. This is a third episode of dangerous heat building in the same summer, the third one in approximately 3 weeks. Why? A third episode in 3 weeks is fundamentally different. Y'all, I need to make sure you understand why this third heat episode, even if it produces temperatures that look similar on a thermometer to what the country has already experienced this summer, is categorically more dangerous than the first or the second event was when it arrived. The reason is cumulative physiological burden. The human body has mechanisms for adapting to sustained heat, acclimatization processes that allow it to manage heat stress more efficiently over time. But those adaptation mechanisms require adequate overnight recovery to function. And if you have been following my coverage of this summer's heat pattern, you know that adequate overnight recovery is exactly what this pattern has been consistently denying to the communities most heavily impacted by it. 2/3 of the more than 90 local temperature records broken during the second heat dome were overnight low temperature records. The NWS confirmed that cities like Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Tampa, Galveston, and Charleston were not seeing overnight temperatures drop below 80 degrees Fahrenheit. When those communities enter a third heat episode, carrying 2 weeks of accumulated physiological heat debt, when they have not had a single overnight low in the range where bodies properly recover, the margin between heat exhaustion and heat stroke narrows to a degree that forecasters and emergency managers should be treating with the highest possible level of urgency. Additionally, the ground surface itself carries cumulative heat stress. Soil moisture is depleted across the affected regions. Pavement and concrete surfaces have been absorbing solar radiation for weeks without adequate overnight cooling. The urban heat island effect, the degree to which cities run warmer than their rural surroundings because of the heat absorbed by their built environment, is more pronounced after sustained heat than it is at the beginning of a heat event. A city that was running 3 to 4 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside in late June may be running 6 to 7 degrees warmer, entering a third heat episode in mid to late July after weeks of accumulated surface heating. The thermometer reading on the official weather station does not capture that difference. The person standing on a downtown sidewalk in Dallas or Kansas City or St. Louis absolutely feels it. The specific heat threat by region. What the next 2 weeks look like. Let me get specific about the regional heat threat that the CPC's forecast is describing, because the geographic distribution of this third heat episode is different from the first two in ways that matter for community-level awareness. The central and southern plains, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, are the primary target for the heat index hazard the CPC is flagging. The southerly flow off the Gulf of America that the CPC is specifically calling out as the mechanism for boosting dew points east of the Rockies is going to funnel warm, moist Gulf air directly northward into this corridor. And when that moisture combines with the surface temperatures generated by the rebuilding ridge, heat index values in the 105 to 112 degree range are possible across a broad area. Dallas, Oklahoma City, Wichita, Kansas City. These are cities that were already hit hard by the first heat dome and have not had an extended period of below normal temperatures since. They are entering this next round with depleted physiological reserves, stressed electricity infrastructure, and a population that is simultaneously exhausted by summer heat and increasingly complacent about the warnings. The Gulf Coast from Texas through the Florida Panhandle and into the southeast is the secondary heat hazard corridor. The same southerly Gulf flow that is boosting dew points across the plains is also maintaining high dew points across the Gulf states. And in the context of the subtropical ridging the CPC is forecasting for this corridor, heat index values above 100 degrees are expected to persist across portions of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle through much of the coming week. In communities where the overnight lows have not been dropping below 80 degrees for weeks, a heat index above 100 during the day, while the overnight low is 82, represents a thermal environment that is genuinely dangerous for anyone without effective air conditioning. The Southwest deserves specific attention for the second half of the 2-week period. The CPC is explicitly flagging that temperature rises favored early in week 2 increase the chances for extreme heat to develop across parts of the Southwest. This is the portion of the forecast that concerns me most for the wildfire picture, because the Southwest, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and the fire-prone corridors of Southern California enters a renewed heat episode from a baseline that is already extraordinarily dry and fire-stressed from the weeks of above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation that have preceded this third event. Extreme heat in the Southwest in the second half of July, on top of critically dry fuels, is the combination that drives the most explosive and most dangerous fire behavior of the entire year. The monsoonal wildcard, rain in the wrong places, at the wrong times. I also want to talk about the monsoonal moisture component of this weekend's pattern, because it is the piece of the heat picture that I think gets the least attention, and that has the most counterintuitive implications. The WPC's short-range forecast discussion and their Day 3 excessive rainfall outlooks are both flagging daily monsoonal showers and thunderstorms continuing across the western United States this weekend. The WPC Day 3 excessive rainfall outlook, valid for Sunday, July 19th, was updated Friday evening and expanded the marginal risk area to include more of southern Nevada, including Las Vegas and portions of southeast California, in addition to the existing risk area across portions of Arizona and New Mexico. Now here is the counterintuitive piece. Monsoonal moisture in the southwest during a heat event sounds like relief. Rain, clouds, humidity, and it is relief from the dry heat in some respects, but it also brings something that I have talked about extensively on this channel in recent updates, dry lightning. When monsoonal thunderstorms develop over the desert mountain ranges and their outflow boundaries spread into adjacent terrain, the rain that falls from those storms often evaporates before it reaches the ground. The lightning does not evaporate. It reaches the ground just fine, and it reaches fuel conditions that are extraordinarily dry after weeks of heat. The NWS fire weather forecasts across the southwest have been flagging elevated fire danger, specifically related to dry lightning from monsoonal convection for most of this month. And this weekend's continued monsoonal activity over critically dry terrain is going to keep that threat active. Meanwhile, the monsoonal pattern in the Four Corners and the high terrain of Arizona and New Mexico will also produce heavy rainfall events in the afternoon and evening over the canyon country and over communities that are built in narrow drainage ways. The WPC's marginal risk expansion into southern Nevada, in southeast California reflects the recognition that the monsoonal moisture is running deeper into the desert southwest than the typical daily cycle would deliver, and that localized flash flooding in the desert canyon country, where water runs fast, concentrates quickly, and provides almost no warning to people in its path, is a real and immediate hazard this weekend. What you need to do, the practical guidance for the next 2 weeks. Y'all, let me close with the specific, actionable guidance for each of the communities that the CPC's forecast is targeting over the next 2 weeks. If you are in the central and southern plains, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, the hazardous heat index values the CPC is flagging for your region over the coming week are arriving on top of physiological reserves that have already been depleted by 2 previous heat events. Please take this third round more seriously than you took the first 2, not less seriously. Check on your elderly neighbors. Know the signs of heat stroke. Drink water continuously before you feel thirsty. If you are an outdoor worker, do not push through conditions your body is telling you to stop in. If you are in the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, the Florida Panhandle, the heat index and the humidity are your primary hazard over the coming week. Air conditioning is not optional during this period. Know where your community's cooling centers are before you need them. And watch the Gulf disturbance story closely, because the heat pattern and the Gulf system are happening simultaneously, and the rainfall from the Gulf system is going to arrive in communities that are heat-stressed and that may welcome the rain without being prepared for the flash flooding risk that comes with heavy rain falling on sun-baked, dried-out urban drainage systems. If you are in the Southwest, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, Southern California, know your wildfire evacuation zone, have your go-bag ready, and be aware that the monsoonal thunderstorm activity this weekend can produce both dry lightning fire starts and sudden flash floods in the desert canyon terrain with very little warning. And everywhere in the heat corridors, set up y'all call before you go to sleep tonight, because the severe thunderstorm and tornado activity along the edge of this rebuilding ridge is going to be active through the overnight hours repeatedly over the coming week. And a direct phone call to your specific number when a warning covers your exact location is what gets you up into shelter when your body desperately needs sleep, and your phone would otherwise let you miss the warning entirely. $14.95 for a full year. Y'all, something very big is developing this weekend, and it is not just in the Gulf. The CPC's probabilistic hazards outlook is showing anomalous mid-level ridging persisting through the central and western United States for the next 2 weeks, with a 594 decameter contour anchored near the Four Corners. Subtropical ridging building into the south-central United States, end of week 1 into week 2. Southerly Gulf flow, generating potentially hazardous heat index values across the central and southern plains and Gulf Coast, and the possibility of extreme heat developing across the southwest in week 2 on top of already critically dry fire weather conditions. This is the third major heat episode of the 2026 summer. It is arriving on top of communities that have been carrying cumulative heat stress for weeks. And it deserves the same urgent attention from every community in its path that the first 2 events received. I am going to be tracking this pattern every single day as it evolves. Subscribe and ring that notification bell. Share this video with your family in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, the Gulf states, and the Southwest. And as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.